Just let it play out.
Utopian communities. I feel like it suddenly got very hot.
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's going to be very easy for you to win prizes.
Handy.
Okay, quick announcements. Although I'm pretty sure all of you know this. All right, Stephen, and there's no one else in here who's... So we had a mix-up between our schedule and the fest schedule on what movie is showing tonight, but tonight is Land Before Time.
Wait, they really messed up our schedule this year because they also had 12 and under Smash Brothers.
And the Smash Brothers tournament is for all ages.
The second day is 13 plus. The first day is 12 and under.
Okay. Well, that's good clarification. All right.
Wait, so what do they have on the schedule tonight?
Idiocracy. They just flipped them.
Maybe we should ask, when people show up, we should ask what they're here to see.
Yeah.
You have your children.
Yeah.
Well, and we'll have it on the board.
Maybe we should put it, yeah.
All right. Well, intrepid few. Let's start with some trivia. All right, works the same way as yesterday. I'm going to read some lyrics from one of the songs on our Utopian playlist. And if you know what the song is, just raise your hand, and I will call on you and give you a Utopia-appropriate candy prize. All right, number one. The winter is forbidden till December and exits March the 2nd on the dot. By order, summer lingers through September in...
Camelot.
Exactly.
Wait. The Monty Python Camelot?
No, that's Spamalot.
You got to take 5 for rest.
All right.
Number 2.
There's your vacation.
Yeah, that's it. You get a candy bar. This is not our last breath. We will open our mouths wider.
I'm going to try to win you candy, but I also don't know the names of any songs.
This is somebody who's played at Audiofeed.
David Bazan, he's the only one I know.
This is not our last breath. We will open our
The
mouths
Rez Band.
wider.
Stephen Taylor.
You know it. I know you know it. Yes?
Longer. This is not the end.
That's right. Gunberg, this is not the end. All right. I wish I had a wider pool of age groups and
You can just throw candy at us and we'll appreciate
we
it.
go to the doctor, we go to the mountains, we look to the children, we drink from the fountain. Yeah, we go to the Bible, we go through the workout, we read up on revival, we stand up for the lookout. There's more than one answer to these questions, pointing me in a crooked line. Female duo, 90s.
Amy Grant.
Amy Grant is one person, Stephen.
She's the only 90s.
90s.
Yes.
Indigo?
Indigo Girls. Do you know the name of their biggest hit? Anyone? I'm still going to do the candy. Closer to 5 by the Indigo Girls. There, have a couple I'll enjoy. Lemonade stands everywhere. Cracker Jack bands fill the air. And there you are. Happy landings on a chocolate bar. Ooh, that was close.
I think he got it.
That is correct. Apple crackers for the peaceful kingdom. Fine and win. Little darling, the smile's returning to our faces. Little darling, it seems like years since it's been here.
Here comes the sun.
That's right. Very good.
Woo!
And I haven't used any of these yet, but you know, there's no poverty in the Utopia, so you get a couple $100 grand on it. Oh.
should talk about how candy has utopian underpinning.
That's why she's doing this.
I mean, the good ship lollipop, the entire Utopia is candy and snacks.
Yes.
Okay, it doesn't matter what you wear, just as long as you are there. So come on, every guy, grab a girl, everywhere around the world. Every one of you knows this song.
Dancing in the street.
Excellent, very good. Take 5.
I know, dude. I don't think we're gonna make
All right.
it to the candy ship, but
Don't panic, dude. I'll have extra candy. There's a golden moon that shines. I feel like nobody's gonna get this, but it's such a great song. You get a tip on a good song. There's a golden moon that shines up through the mist, and I know that your name can be on that list. There's no eye for eye, no tooth for a tooth. I saw Judas Iscariot carrying John Wilkes
Oh,
Booth.
not right now.
Anybody recognize that one? This is the one I'm going to give Mikey candy for.
woo!
Would he prefer animal crackers or 100 grand?
One. Let's go with animal crackers.
Okay. That is the song Down There by the Train by Tom Waits. I can't recommend it highly enough.
Mikey catch.
Problems all left alone, weekenders on our own. It's such fun. Guy with a really weird voice. Also, Tom Waits.
Tom Waits. Dang it!
Different weird voice. Anybody? Anyone? What?
Bob Dylan?
Good guess on the weird voice, but no, it's Lou Reed, Perfect Day. You are, yeah. There's a land that's fair and bright where the handouts grow on bushes and you sleep out every night, where the boxcars all are empty and the sun shines every day.
Amber and I kind of tied. It's Big Rock Candy Mountain, finally.
You did it!
Yay!
Well, how about I give each of you an almond joy?
Whoa!
I don't do coconut.
How about I give you 100 grand? Will you eat that one?
These are for you.
See, this is why we can't have Utopia, because we can't even agree.
On whether coconut is delicious.
Yes, coconut is delicious, Amber. Okay.
I'm siding with Amber on this one.
Pick your utopian candy.
Last one. One day this all will change, treat people the same, stop with the violence, down with the hate. One day we'll all be free and proud to be under the same sun, singing songs of freedom like. Literally just listen to this song.
I don't know, one day.
No, it was not the
Yeah.
Beatles.
Yeah, this is One Day by Modest Yahoo.
Legit.
Yeah, that's one of my
Yeah.
favorites. Okay. What are the rest
A soda or? Uh-oh.
All right. The philosopher Tommaso Campanella was 13 when he entered the Dominican order, and he was in his 20s the first time that his heterodox views got him in trouble with the church and arrested. That was in 1594. He was denounced to the Inquisition, partly because he was really into astrology and he had lots of ideas that were unwelcome in the church at the time. He was released from prison a few years later, and almost immediately after being released, he went home and tried to start a community, like an experimental utopian community, based on common ownership of property and common ownership of wives. Again, with the, yeah.
I sense a theme and I don't appreciate it.
And it wasn't long before he was back in prison. This time he was in prison for 27 years straight and tortured several times. He finally fully confessed to the Inquisition, and he would have been executed, except that he feigned mental illness and set his prison cell on fire, and so they had mercy on him. But while he was in prison, he actually did quite a bit of writing. But while he was in prison, he wrote his most famous work, which is a sort of speculative novel called The City of the Sun, which was a written description of the kind of community that he was trying to start. And it's framed as a dialogue between a Genoese sailor who's recently returned from a trip and a night of the, I don't know how to say this word, Hospitaliers of St. John. And the sailor is telling this knight all about this place that he's visited, this splendid city somewhere in the Indian Ocean. Now, all of the kind of legendary, mythical, fictional utopias are beautiful to look at. The cities are often laid out in these very precise geometrical patterns, or like the one I mentioned yesterday, Shambhala, that's laid out like a lotus flower. So, of course, the City of the Sun is beautiful. There's one called Adocentine, that's an ancient Egyptian mythical city that even has, like in the middle of the city, it has a tower with an orb on the top, and the orb changes colors every day for 8 days and bathes the whole city in that color. So, they're all beautiful. But what really interests us for our purposes of trying to actually create a utopia is how they function as societies. So in the City of the Sun, there's no poverty, almost no crime, very little vice. Because there's no private ownership, no one can become rich and no one is poor. You can receive honors for service to the community, including the right to wear slightly better clothing or more distinctively marked clothing, but you're not given private wealth, and most people dress identically. They eat communally. The food is very simple and healthful. The younger people wait on the older people. There's a slight inequality in portions. The officials in the city get a little bit more, but they're able to share that with other people as a sign of honor. The healthy life there allows residents to live long lives, most to 100 years of age, a few to 200 years. So far, would you like to live in the City of the Sun?
I'm in. Let's do it.
You're in. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you a little more about the City of the Sun. There is a ruler. His title is the Great Metaphysicus, which is pretty cool. And he has 3 sort of under officials with the titles Power, Wisdom, and Love. But really, they agree to whatever he directs them to. So he's pretty close to an absolute ruler. Everyone serves the state, and the state cares for everyone. The city has rigidly divided male and female roles, but no traditional families. Everyone lives in dorms. We're moved every 6 months. Children are reared collectively, but they're separated by age. So girls are raised by women, boys are raised by men. And the magistrate Love is in charge of matching women and men for procreation so as to produce the best offspring. And since wives, and they're using the word wife here quite loosely, but since women or wives are held in common, there are no permanent romantic partnerships allowed. They do practice capital punishment in the City of the Sun, although they don't have to do it too often. But if you are convicted of having betrayed the ruler or the city, before you are executed, they have people whose job it is, that special functionaries whose job it is to explain to you why you have committed an offense that is deserving of death, so that ultimately you will acquiesce to your own execution. And by the way, capital crimes for women include wearing makeup or high heels. One of the mottos of the City of the Sun is, when we have taken away self-love, there remains only love for the state. Now what do you think about living in the City of the Sun?
I think I want to set a novel there.
Can men wear high heels?
Maybe not, because his objection to women wearing makeup and high heels is that you're trying to trick men on what you really look like.
It's not self-love. It's not yourself.
Right. And if you just said, no, I don't want to live there, would it make a difference if the vast majority of people are just as happy as Campanella thought they would be? Would that make it worthwhile to live in a place like the City of the Sun? Now, Campanella is a relatively early example of philosophers and religious visionaries and political activists who went past just dreaming of an ideal world and who drafted actual plans that some of them, like Campanella, actually tried to put into practice, although he didn't get very far before he got arrested again. because his setting up that community was considered an act of rebellion against the state, against the Spanish rulers.
The irony.
So, kind of the grandfather of all of this is Plato. In the Plato's Republic, he created his own kind of model for society, which he had never tried to enact. It was just, pure philosophy at that point. Kind of the central principle of Plato's Republic is it's very hierarchical. Everyone knows their place, and everyone stays in their lane, and that's how you keep order and harmony. In addition to that, the arts are censored for the public good so as to cultivate desirable virtues, because art can be used to corrupt people, corrupt minds. There is no private property. Education is available to all, but as in the City of the Sun, there's also no family as we would know it. Women and children are held in common, and it's so important to Plato that people not get too attached to, the idea of family or bloodlines, or have these permanent relationships that might take priority over the community, that parents don't even know who their children are. As soon as you give birth, your child is taken from you, and women raise baby, you're nursing, but you don't know whose baby you're nursing. They're just kind of swapped around. Campanella, one of the other things that Campanella was inspired by in Plato's Republic was the eugenic idea of breeding people together to create the healthiest, strongest, smartest citizens for the future. But in Plato's Republic, they go even farther, because if an inferior child is born, obviously defective child is born, that child should not be allowed to live. Although he says that needs to be managed very discreetly, because people may rebel over that if they believe that their children are being exterminated. Now, probably none of us are down for living in Plato's Republic, and some of that we would just attribute to Plato's time. Like, infanticide was not uncommon in the ancient world. Nor was that idea of a very strict hierarchy in the universe. The whole created order was believed to be a hierarchy. And some of the very Spartan ideas about parenting and education. But in the 24 roughly 100 years since Plato wrote the Republic, there have been countless other models for ideal societies, and particularly in the last 250 years or so. There's a utopian scholar, Lyman Towers Sargent, who, this is his list that I'm using. He says there are socialist, capitalist, monarchical, democratic, anarchist, feminist, patriarchal, egalitarian, hierarchical, racist, left-wing, right-wing, nudist, Christian nudist, free love, nuclear family, extended family, gay, lesbian, and many more utopias. And that list, of course, already points to the challenge of having any wider utopia, any wider ideal society, because we have desires which conflict, and if my desire and Bruce's desires butt up against each other and we're trying to create the same community, utopia is going to be difficult to obtain. But that hasn't stopped us from trying to get mighty close. And part of the reason that that's been more common in the last 250 years or so is wider cultural shifts that took place. I mean, the medieval mindset, as in the ancient world, was really that their theological view was that God kind of set people in places in society. If you were born a serf, God meant for you to be a serf. You weren't generally out fomenting revolution with other serfs, despite what Monty Python would tell us. And a theological kind of view of suffering. Suffering was just the way life is, and as I said yesterday, somewhere, a lot of people were just surviving. Creating a better world was just really not on their radar. And this was partly shaken loose by the Protestant Reformation, in which suddenly this one, at least in Europe, there had pretty much been one theological framework with which to view the world, and now you're getting dissent. And you've got the Enlightenment, you've got revolutions in America and France, the Great Awakening, the Second Great Awakening, the Industrial Revolution. Religious communities sprang up from the Protestant Reformation. Lots and lots of religious communities, most of which didn't survive, but of course this country was partly founded by people like the Puritans who were trying to create the kingdom of God on earth. But also in England there was a group called the Diggers that were an early agrarian socialist Christian commune. There were others with interesting names like the Ranters and the Shakers came out of this, the Enthusiasts, the Sabbatarians, the Grindletonians, and the Muggletonians were early Christian intentional communities like
Can you say those names again?
Grindletonians and Muggletonians. I'm thinking somebody had heard those names. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then the Anabaptist movement in a different part of Europe gave birth to other communities, some of which have survived. I mean, the Amish and the Mennonites, but also some of you may have heard of the Hutterites or the Bruderhof, or my hometown, Sedalia. Outside Sedalia, there is a community of Old Order German Baptists who they look like dress like Mennonites, but it's a different group. The Enlightenment led to an elevation of rationalism and the idea of the state that was something that we could construct. It's not just like given by us by God and the authorities, but like Thomas Hobbes said, that the state came to be seen as like a work of art or an artificial man that serves the natural man. And from then it was only one more step to imagine that the state could be rendered perfect through perfect planning and foresight. And as for America, we had this abundance of available land, which made it a big draw even for, well, like the Puritans, but lots of other communities came in from outside the United States to use some of that land to establish their colonies. And also the religious revivals of the 18th century and the 19th century, with their emphasis not just on personal piety but on social reform, helped to produce the explosion of Christian utopias in the 19th century. We are in the Church of the Nazarene, which is a descendant of the Methodist movement, and John Wesley is a good example of a religious leader who was very much about broader social action, economic reform, and ending slavery. And Robert Rates, the father of Sunday school, started Sunday school in part as a way to educate poor children. It was a social reform movement, wasn't just church. And finally, we had the Industrial Revolution, which led to a new concentration of wealth among the titans of industry and often appalling working conditions for those who were producing their wealth. And that helped to bring about the rise of Marxism especially, which helped shape some of the communities. It's sort of a chicken and egg bowl. These socialist communities helped to shape Marxism, and Marxism further helped to shape socialist communities. So you wind up with the 19th century jam-packed with reformers and philosophers and religious leaders starting intentional communities. One writer in the mid-19th century said it was impossible to find a well-read man without a draft of a new community in his waistcoat pocket. Now most utopian communities, yes?
Francis Charles.
Who said that?
Yeah.
Actually don't know. The article I read it didn't name him. And I should have looked. You may be right. Most utopian communities, if they got off the ground at all, did not last very long. Bronson Alcott was the father of Louisa May Alcott, and I don't know if you've ever read anything about her upbringing, but he was a transcendentalist, but he was kind of a nut. The rules that he imposed upon his family, and they were chronically poor. But he started a transcendentalist community, agrarian commune called the Fruitlands in 1843. The main purpose was to improve society through simplicity in diet, plain garments, pure bathing, unsullied dwellings. And it lasted 7 months before they had to close because of food shortages. Now, to Scottish socialist Robert Owens came to the U.S. to establish a secular, egalitarian, cooperative, self-sufficient community. And he had big visions for this being a pattern across society. It really was just, he just felt like this was the wave of the future, and he founded his community in New Harmony, Indiana. Any of you ever been to New Harmony?
No, but I did know that.
Yeah. Didn't we used to have field trips to New Harmony when we were in college? That one lasted a few years, did better than Fruitlands. Brook Farm near Boston lasted for 6 years. It was modeled on the teachings of the French socialist Charles Fourier, who had some good ideas, although he was a terrible anti-Semite. Brook Farm was trying to combine the thinker and the worker. Like, no matter what work you do in the community, you should have mental freedom and the opportunity to cultivate the mind, so that society would end up, with a full of liberal, cultivated persons whose relations with each other would permit a more wholesome and simple life than could be led among the pressures of competitive institutions. What Brook Farm became best known for, though, was its school and the educational model of its really quite good schools. Perfect freedom of relations between students and teaching body. No punitive discipline in the school. It was just gentle attempts to instill in the student a sense of personal responsibility and to communicate a passion for intellectual work. No prescribed study hours, and each student was required to give a few hours a day to manual labor. Now, I could talk for a long, long time about lots of other communities that started and failed. In the promo for this, Stephen mentioned the Oneida community. The Oneida community was a Christian perfectionist colony. Christian perfectionist is very different. We come from the holiness tradition talks about perfection in holiness. This is very different. This is basically the idea that once you are saved, you can't sin. So it's a little antinomian, as they say, spiritually lawless, but still very strict rules within the society, which doesn't make any sense to me. But the Oneida colony actually lasted for like 30 years. Did pretty well, as these things go, but was notorious for their sexual practices. It's called complex marriage, no family attachment. So if you even, there was a story in that podcast Stephen and I both listened to about the Oneida colony, about a young man who got too attached to a young woman, and the discipline within the colony was for him to completely disassociate with her, have no contact with her at all. Every man was considered the husband of every woman was considered the husband of every wife, or you get it. Everybody's married to everybody. And yet it wasn't a free love colony, because you still had to have your sexual relations approved, partly for the sake of good procreation. However, they did establish a silverware industry that remains with us today, Oneida Silverware. And that's probably part of the reason they made it as long as they did, is that they actually established industries that earned them significant income. So beyond that, there's the Amana colonies and Icaria, lots of other places that started and stopped. But I don't actually want to end with failures today. And the fact is that even some of those places were not entirely failures in terms of impact. So, New Harmony failed as an independent community, but Robert Owens was a big influence on Engels and Marx. His socialism helped to shape the global Marxist struggle. And Brook Farm, for its part, helped to change the face of education. So homeschoolers who follow child-led learning or unschooling, or friends of mine who are involved in like Sudbury schools or Waldorf schooling, all of that has been partly shaped by Brook Farm's initial approach to education, their models. So failed communities often inspired later reformers, and the changes that didn't come overnight still rippled outward. It's like, we were talking yesterday, I don't even remember who, about how if you're going to attempt utopia and fail, you need to fail in a way that makes things a little better and not a little worse. Like, so they, fail forward if you want to fail. And then there are a couple of movements I want to talk to you about here toward the end. One of them I didn't learn anything about in school, maybe some of you did, which was the cooperative economies during the Great Depression. Have any of you ever read about this? You have? Kevin always knows things that I don't. He never brags about what he knows. He just knows.
He's the silent arbiter.
Yeah. Just to simplify things for myself, most of what I'm going to read to you about the cooperative economies during the Depression is taken from an article in Yes magazine, but I went out and did a bunch of research, and they should have taught us about this in school. So in the spring of 1932 in Compton, California, an unemployed World War I veteran walked out to the farms that still ringed Los Angeles. He offered his labor in return for a sack of vegetables, and that evening he returned with more than his family needed. The next day, a neighbor went with him out to the fields, and within 2 months, 500 families were members of the Unemployed Cooperative Relief Organization. And that group became one of 45 units in an organization that served the needs of some 150,000 people. It operated a large warehouse, a distribution center, a gas and service station, a refrigeration facility, a sewing shop, a shoe shop, even medical services, all on cooperative principles. Members were expected to work 2 days a week, and benefits were allocated according to need. So a member with a wife and 2 kids got 4 times as much food as someone living alone. The organization was run democratically, and social support was as important as material support. Members helped one another resist evictions, like they were kind of fighting the powers together, so sometimes they would, after people's furniture had been moved out, co-op members would come and just move it right back in. They had unemployed utility workers who would come turn your power back on after it had been turned off. The UCRO was just one organization in one city, and groups like it ultimately involved more than 1.3 million people in more than 30 states. It happened spontaneously without experts or blueprints. Most of the participants were blue-collar workers whose formal schooling had stopped at high school. Some groups evolved a kind of money to create more flexibility in exchange. An example was the Unemployed Exchange Association, or UXA, based in Oakland, California. It began in Hooverville, which was an encampment of the poor and the homeless during the Depression that they named after the president. And this particular Hooverville was called Pipe City near the East Bay waterfront because the homeless people were living in a section of sewer pipe that was never laid because the city ran out of money. And one of the residents of this Pipe City was Carl Rodemel. And Rodemel and others started going door to door in Oakland offering to do home repairs in exchange for unwanted items. Then they repaired these and circulated them among themselves. Soon they established a commissary and sent scouts around the city and into surrounding farms to see what they could scavenge or exchange labor for. And within 6 months, they had 1,500 members in a thriving sub-economy that included a foundry and a machine shop, wood shop, garage, soap factory, print shop, wood lot, ranches, and lumber mills. They rebuilt 18 trucks from scrap. At UXA's peak, it distributed 40 tons of food a week, and it all worked on a time credit system. Each hour worked earned 100 points. There was no hierarchy of skills, and all work paid the same. Members could use credits to buy food and other items at the commissary, including medical and dental services, haircuts, and more. A council of some 45 coordinators met regularly to solve problems and discuss opportunities. One coordinator might report that a saw needed a new motor, and another knew of a motor, but the owner wanted a piano in return. A third member knew of a piano that was available, and on and on. It was an amalgam of enterprise and cooperation, the flexibility and hustle of the market, but without the encoded greed of the corporation or the stifling bureaucracy of the state. The economics texts don't really have a name for it, but the members called it a reciprocal economy.
Wow.
Isn't that not cool?
That's so cool.
It was basically killed off by the WPA. That's what happened to it. Which I generally think of the WPA as a good thing, but yeah. Anyway, I want to look at one other 20th century movement that had great success for about 25 years. We might not think of it as utopia, but I think they were moving in the right direction. I don't want to offend anyone with this one, but it was the Black Panther Party. The Black Panthers started as a self-defense organization to address police brutality in Oakland, and expanded into a nationwide political party and social movement that lasted about 16 years at its kind of in its early form. There's a new Black Panther Party. I don't know enough about it to have any opinion on the continuity of ideals or actions. Just as a side note, the Black Panthers were initially very much into gun rights. I mean, they may still be, but the NRA backed gun control legislation in California after members of the Black Panther Party went to the Capitol in Sacramento, open carrying at the sight of a bunch of black people with guns, which is too terrifying. And so the gun laws were changed. So I think there is some continuity there on how the NRA treats black people when they carry guns. In addition to challenging police brutality, the Black Panther Party launched more than 35 what they called survival programs and provided community help such as clothing distribution, classes on politics and economics, free medical clinics, legal aid, lessons on self-defense and first aid, transportation to upstate prisons for family members of inmates, an emergency response ambulance program, drug and alcohol rehabilitation, and testing for sickle cell and tuberculosis. The free medical clinics modeled an idea of how the world might work with free medical care. They have 13 clinics functioning across the country. Also of particular note was their free breakfast for children program, started in 1969, that spread to every major American city with a Black Panther Party chapter. The federal government had introduced a similar program in 1966, but you could argue, in response to the Panthers initiative, they extended the program and made it permanent in 1975. And if you don't think their ultimate goals were utopian or for a wide social reform, complete restructuring the country, I want you to listen to their 10-point program called What We Want Now. Number one, we want freedom. We want the power to determine the destiny of our black community. Number two, we want full employment for our people. Number three, we want an end to the robbery by the capitalists of our black community. Number four, we want decent housing, fit for shelter of human beings. Number five, we want education for our people that exposes the true nature of this decadent American society. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. Number six, we want all black men to be exempt from military service. Number seven, we want an immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. Number eight, we want freedom for all black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. Number nine, we want all black people when brought to trial to be tried in a court by a jury of their peer group or people from their black communities as defined by the Constitution of the United States. Number 10, we want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. I think that line's about as close as I could get to saying what I want in Utopia, by the way. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. There are still people all around us trying to build something new and good and beautiful in the shell of the old, and they probably wouldn't call it Utopia. Just sometime Google the Foundation for Intentional Communities and look at their map and read up on some of the communities on there. They're all over the place. And they, to be included in that site's map, you have to share a commitment to cooperation, sustainability, social justice, nonviolence, and non-coercion. Or you might consider the work being done by Shane Claiborne, who's speaking here this year, and his partners in the Simple Way community in Philadelphia. Or yesterday, we heard speakers from, was it called the Beloved? What?
Beloved Asheville.
Yeah.
Beloved Asheville.
Beloved Asheville Intentional Community. They had speakers from that community. Tomorrow we're going to begin our last session with some speculative fiction. We're actually going to go to Ursula Le Guin. That asks us hard questions. It starts pretty grim, I'm going to be honest, about where we live now and the price that we are willing to attach to a better world and who is going to pay that price. But I just wanted to wrap up today with some positivity and appreciation for the foolish dreamers who still just keep trying and keep insisting that a better world is possible. Are there any questions today? Yes?
You mentioned at the beginning how all of the utopias that you had talked about yesterday were beautiful, like they were beautifully mapped out cities and stuff. And then you said that we're not really talking about the beauty of things so much as how things, like we're trying to figure out how to make this work in the real world, so we're just going to talk about some real world examples. But what do you think beautiful surroundings have to do with creating?
You're right that I shouldn't separate those two things. I bet there's someone in here who has a better answer to that. Because I've always been, unfortunately, the sort of person who lives in my head and doesn't. Like, I'm not a visual learner. I don't notice my surroundings. And yet I do intellectually believe there's a strong connection between people's surroundings and their well-being. And even there's like an environmental justice movement, which isn't just about health, although it is very much about health. But it's also about what it means to put some people in places that are ugly. You know, when you design your low-income housing and you make it look like a prison. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Well, just that, you know, the list, you know, as you were going down the list of like all the different communities, almost all of them are, like a lot of them are outdoors on a farm, agricultural, and that kind of ties to that, as opposed to being in a, you know, building complex. A lot of them were kind of outdoor, which to me kind of ties to that idea of like, from a couple of years ago, of like sacred spaces or thin places and how nature connects to that. I kind of see those as being connected in a way. That like in a perfect society, you're looking for unity with the land as well as people probably.
Right.
And I think that, you know, I think at least idealistically, unity with the land looks beautiful.
Right.
I think another aspect of that is the fact that you want community to be self-sufficient.
Yeah. You need fruit trees.
Yeah. You need land, you need
But they do have varying ideas on art. Like some of them are definitely artistically minded and some of them are not, because gathering is dangerous. I was gonna say the whole thing kind of reminds me of like a college campus, which by that last line in the Black Panther, you know, what they want, a college campus actually fills a lot of those. You know, it's not, you need a constant infusion of outside capital, so it's not really sustainable, not self-sustainable. But in a college campus, you take a bunch of people, you provide them with housing, food, education, recreation. It's generally this bucolic, sort of wooded, well-maintained space. I mean, and it's not true of every college, I'm sure, but the colleges I have always seen were aesthetically beautiful and very, you know, thoughtfully designed. The buildings are all sort of like Hogwarts, you know, and I don't know, like it's just a nice place to be. And as someone who has struggled a little bit with mental health issues, I find that my environment has a big impact on that. So like if I'm outside in nature, if I get a lot of sunshine, if I'm smelling fresh air from lots of trees, I tend to do, not always, but I tend to do better in terms of my mental health than if I'm surrounded by concrete and always floors. So yeah, I think it matters.
That's supported by research too. There's some studies out that being outside, spending time outside, you see, especially with kids, Lawrence is ADHD, and it doesn't have to be wild wilderness. It just has to be a clump of trees in the backyard. Same thing. And there's the trees in our microbiome.
to the seminar that we did last year on the place of animals in Christian theology. The messages that we said when we treat animal, that they confined animal feed operations. I am like 90% vegetarian now. I'm not having much like here because Zach's took the vegetarian optional.